Well, our reading this morning comes from the Sunday worship service at the 2016 General Assembly of the Unitarian Universalist Association, which is our denomination's annual national business and educational meeting. The sermon was given by the Reverend Nancy McDonald Ladd of River Road UU congregation in Bethesda, Maryland. It was called, "In All Thy Getting, Get Understanding." I was at that General Assembly, heard the sermon live, but I have to tell you that I was sitting way in the back and I didn't hear its message as clearly as I did when I went back and looked at it recently and from the church's website at uua.org. You can find it if you go on, look for General Assembly and past General Assemblies, and you'll find it there. Speaking of its message, it was only last night that it dawned on me where the sermon's title comes from, which is Proverbs chapter 4, verse 7, which says, "Wisdom is the principal thing. Therefore get wisdom, and with all thy getting, get understanding." So what words of wisdom did the Reverend McDonald Ladd have for us? Here are some passages that I found particularly meaningful, and I hope you do too. What the world needs is a movement like ours to step more fully into our higher calling, to serve as an instrument for encounter with one another, with the holy, and with the world, so that we might love more fully and speak more truly and serve with greater efficacy in such a time as this. I think we need to lean into the real fights of our age. We need to do the work before us, not let another 50 years pass and ask again, what in the world have we been doing all the time while the dream goes unrealized? We need to preserve our capacity for the precious gift it is, our capacity to engage. We need, friends, to keep it real. Keeping it real means admitting what we're really all here for in the first place. In spite of what every congregational satisfaction survey says, this brought laughter in the hall, we did not come here for the coffee, and we did not come here for the great music. We don't even come for our awesome, excellent ministers. You don't. We come because we have a deep, aching need for an encounter with the holy that crosses our borders and expands our hearts. We come to be part of something so much larger than ourselves. We in the liberal church are called to help create an America that moves beyond the punitiveness and division of our days. The greatest impediment to the efficacy of the liberal church now is not the real fights and real failures we get into when we are doing the hard work. It is the fake fights we waste time on, at like who got their way in what bylaw discussion and what color we should paint the church bathroom. I love these words, as I have seen this sort of thing both within Unitarian Universalism and also in organized politics. I have seen people have their number one goal be to create, as if they were creating their little fiefdom, instead of thinking of what are our principles and purposes. Reverend McDonald Ladd's 2016 sermon was aimed squarely on making the case for why each of us who enter into covenant within a religious denomination such as ours ought to take on the work of making itself more anti-racist, anti-oppression, and multicultural. But I'm reminded of a joke that many of us Unitarian Universalists like to tell about ourselves. And I have to say that a number of years ago, I served on our newcomers committee, welcoming committee. It just had different names. And we often seek out those who visit our church or show up for the first time, and we want to help make sure they're welcome. And this is a story about one such visitor who came to a church like ours, sat through the sermon with growing incredulity at the heretical ideas, or what seemed like heretical ideas, being spouted from the pulpit. After the sermon, a member of the welcoming committee Asked the visitor, "So, what did you think of the service?" And the visitor replied, "I can't believe half the things that minister said." The newcomers, the welcome committee person said, "Oh, that's great. You'll fit right in." Okay. You can put in the chat your laughter. It's okay. Tough crowd, I'll tell you. Comedians will tell you it's tough playing to Zoom. You don't get the immediate feedback, but I'm going to trust that you took it in the spirit in which it was offered. So what's the purpose of that joke? Here's more of what Reverend MacDonald Ladd said. Deep-spirited and anti-racist organizer Mickey Scott Bay Jones has said that relationship is the sandpaper that wears away our resistance to change. Relationship is the abrasion that agitates enough to make a way forward. Relationship, consistent and ongoing encounter with people and perspectives different than our own. It smooths the way for the sacred, even as it rubs us raw. And there is a holy abrasion of the spirit that is born in deep relational encounters across differences. We, as congregations and as a movement, exist to be instruments of that holy abrasion. Those very encounters are our work. Again, I can't believe half the things that minister said. Oh, yes, to the way forward, being through relationship with people and perspectives different than our own. I think that's why Unitarian Universalism has taken steps to make sure we keep in mind the myriad sources of wisdom feeding into our living tradition. It invites us to reach out to others. But I like to say that we should be guided by our ideals, not blinded by them. And I think being rubbed raw is taking things a bit too far. Now, I may not be an ordained minister, but I do think I have some professional standing to assert this. I am Dr. Matthew Shearer. My degree is not in religion or philosophy, but optometry. But optometry includes a field called behavioral optometry, which deals with the fact that our experience is heavily processed and interpreted by the brain. And tragic things can happen when our perceptions vary too far from what's really out there. My teacher in this regard did what we Unitarian Universalists do. He built on a living tradition of sources, adding and amplifying what was handed to him by the giants of perceptual and cognitive science with newer information, especially from advances in neurologic imaging. In defining vision, he said the clearest statement I have ever heard about how to make our brains make sense of the world. He said, it's the deriving of meaning and the directing of action. For me, this was revelation. It also explains how things can go wrong. If the meaning we derive is skewed, then the actions we direct based on it will at best be less efficient and or effective and could actually be counterproductive. Here I have to depart from my prepared text to say, I've read books. This one gent, he goes to the most Trumpian county in the country, Roberts County in Texas. He thought he was going to help these yahoos, straighten out. And they basically told him they were doing what it takes to preserve their view of the world. We feel confident that they are misperceiving and they are taking actions in service of that. That's the problem, okay? Deriving of meaning, directing of action. And the trouble is we don't even realize when we are misperceiving and directing these ineffective or counterproductive actions because our misperception defines our world the way we see it. What should we do about it? I'll get to that in just another moment, but there's one more thing to know before we do that. Action requires something to call for it, some stimulus or impetus. The trick is to get enough of that to get going, what is called eustress. Eustress, it comes from Greek, literally meaning good stress. but not so much that you get overwhelmed and shut down, which is called distress. Here's how eustress is defined on Wikipedia, which, based on everything else I've studied, this is a pretty good way to word it. Eustress is not defined by the stress or type, but rather how one perceives that stressor, for example, a negative threat versus a positive challenge. Eustress refers to a positive response one has to a stressor, which can depend on one's current feelings of control, desirability, location, and timing of the stressor. Potential indicators of eustress may include responding to a stressor with a sense of meaning, hope, or vigor. Eustress has also been positively correlated with life satisfaction and well-being. I find that those words describe my life these days, but to put it in Unitarian Universalist terms, I borrow from our opening hymn. My heart is in a holy place, and I am filled with love and amazing grace. I think all of us can get there, a sort of modern take on universalism. Everyone can get there. As I said in introducing the reading, it comes from a sermon given at our Sunday worship at the 2016 GA. If you go and watch that video, you will also hear then Unitarian Universalist Association President Peter Morales introduce the Reverend Nancy MacDonald Ladd with these words. What do we enter into congregational life hoping to get? So many things perhaps, but underneath the consumer's idea of acquisition is the pull to a deeper encounter with the experience of hope, heartbreak, and yearning of others in community. Can we be a place of deep encounter where borders are crossed and faiths connect, where real stories and real struggles intersect and understanding arises anew? I know we can answer yes, but I think we haven't had a particularly robust methodology to help us derive meanings that lead to effective, efficient action. And to see that we are driven by eustress rather than distress in moving forward. What we've had comes out of, what we've seen instead comes out of our Unitarian Universalist principles, especially number 3, acceptance of one another and encouragement to spiritual growth, and number 5, the right of conscience and the use of the democratic process. And principle 4 talks of a search for truth and meaning. But what I've seen, and it's reflected in society at large as well, is clashes between people, each of whom is speaking their truth. They have the answer. But so how do we sort this out? What if there were this robust methodology? Well, is it any surprise that I think I've developed one? It's literally my life's work. Through a career in behavioral optometry, peer counseling, and as I said yesterday at the memorial service, 16 years of a seminary I call summer services, and 2 years in the pulpit, really that crucible in which certain things really get forged. So through all this, I've gotten clearer about what it is. I have realized that a sense of meaning, hope, and vigor with ever more life satisfaction and well-being. And I'd like to see if it might do the same for you. So it starts with this idea. There is no such thing as your truth or my truth. Truth should not be a statement of belief. Truth is a process, one for developing an answer to whatever challenges you may face. And I owe it to my good wife, Joan, who says, oh, you mean like the scientific method? And I say, yeah, thanks. That said it in 2 words. It took me 2 paragraphs. So thank you, Joan. So here's my version of a scientific method for Unitarian Universalists. I'm going to walk you through 8 concepts that I believe will help you do just that. Keeping them in mind can lead you to a life of ever more eustress and less distress. And your heart will be in that holy place of love and grace more and more of the time. The first 4 lay out a framework for what we're trying to do. And the second four help us keep in mind how to make that process work efficiently and effectively. So let's start with 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, there is only one you. There is no one else exactly like you, and there never will be again. And you have so far led a unique life, one not led by anyone else before in quite the same way. You were handed a unique genetic material, and you've had unique life experiences, a history that's helped bring you from where you started to this very day. And that defines where you're coming from. But what next? Well, that depends on number 2. 2 questions you need to answer for yourself if the rest of what I am going to say was going to have meaning for you. The first one I call, do you choose liberal or conservative or orthodox type of approach to religion or spirituality? And I'm oversimplifying here for time, but it basically falls into this. A conservative religion starts with, we are inherently bad, born in sin, and must be saved by a rigid adherence to a particular creed, sacred text, set of religious practices, and often rules for living in general. Good works happen in service of that faith. Liberal religion starts with a different premise. We are inherently good, and we seek ways to express that better and better. We are guided by our creeds, texts, and practices, and good works are the natural byproduct of that faith. We like to say it's about the deed, not the creed. The second question, when feelings come up, do you suppress them or do you release them in a healthy way? Life is more than thinking. We can also have feelings. I think we can all agree that we shouldn't let our feelings control us, but taken too far, a suppression begins to control us. It limits the range of response because so much bandwidth is put to just saying, don't say it, or I must do the right thing, or I have to be good. I think it is important. I've satisfied myself that when you superimpose that control, it keeps you locked up. A piece of your spirit gets trapped with it, and you are your lesser self. 2 quick references before we move on. The best book I've read about anti-racism work is called The Inner Work of Racial Justice by Rhonda V. McGee. She is a law professor and practitioner of MBSR, which is mindfulness-based stress reduction, a kind of westernized form of Buddhism. She has found greater success in achieving racial justice in the law by first breaking down racial barriers and attitudes through MBSR. She doesn't talk much about releasing feelings in her book, but one who has is a fellow named Fred Small. You may have heard about him through his career as a minister in Unitarian Universalism. He spent a number of years as the senior minister at our Unitarian Universalist Church in Cambridge. But when I first met him in 1980, he was an aspiring folk singer. His first album featured a song he had written about liberation struggles, which I'd heard him sing many times. It included the line, "We need the laughter and the tears to wash us clean." Of course, anything else, that can be taken too far. The point is not that the tears is what you need to do, but rather the washing clean part. It's about freeing your mind. And a mind that is being suppressed is not free. Part of what we need to do is create appropriate times and appropriate places in which we can be helped to learn to release these things in a healthy way. Of course, there are times when it does not make sense to do that. It's good to learn how to control yourself. This is particularly important, say, in the military and law enforcement. But if we want to be good neighbors, friends, and relatives, there's time to hold it back and a time to find a way to express it in a healthy way to free ourselves. Number 3, the division of time into past, present, and future. The past is fixed. You can't change it no matter how hard you try. But the future is up for grabs in each and every moment in the present. In that present moment, we must free ourselves from misperception and unhelpful habits from the past so that we can move towards a better future that we choose for ourselves. Number 4 describes what that better future looks like for us. These are broad concepts rather than specific imperatives because remember, number 1, there's only one you. And so you have to interpret them for your life from where you are. But I've arranged them so that they spell out something that might help you to remember them when you get jammed up. Oh, fab. And I do think they are pretty fab if that term from the 60s still applies. They are O. The open heart means that we do not other those people who do not yet see things our way. We see a human spirit and soul behind their less than fully human behaviors. It is being not ruled by our old pain, but rather filled with loving kindness. It is generous and forgiving rather than petty, vindictive, or vengeful. F is the free mind. This is laid out in our reading number 592 in our hymnal, words taken from William Ellery Channing, widely recognized as the leader of Unitarianism at its beginnings 200 years ago. It seeks truth, cherishes doubt, is ruled by fact rather than feelings, etc., etc. And A is agency. You can also call this empowerment. Agency is the ability to shape things according to your clearest vision, to not be subject to the uncaring whims of others, a ship haplessly tossed about on a storm-tossed sea and all that. At a low level, it can be used defensively to ward off the blows of a hard life, but at its full potential lies in helping others to free their minds and open their hearts. And B is bliss. And this word comes from John Hassler Dietrich, the Unitarian minister who is often credited among the founders of humanism as not 100 years ago, not just as philosophy, but as a spiritual pursuit. And he said his naturalistic humanism brought him, quote, a feeling of bliss, and with it the intense longing that I may so live that posterity may have this feeling more fully and more often in the better world we ourselves must build. Others have called this a zestful enjoyment of life. And yesterday morning, again, I credited Larry Schaefer for starting me on this journey towards this. And I believe that through summer services, he realized this for himself as well. I think we all want a life that is, oh, fab. That the challenge is how to get there from that unique place in your past that has led you to this moment of decision. How to proceed forward? Let's look at 5, 6, 7, 8. 5 comes from an essay from 1976 by the giant of 20th century Unitarian Universalism and a theologian named James Luther Adams. Side note, Ken Sawyer told me he was a student of Adams at Harvard Divinity School, and oh, how I wish I had been in those classes. He wrote an essay in 1976. Oh, I skipped a sentence in my prepared text. He's worthy of a whole sermon, and many ministers have done just that, but we'll have to leave it for another time. But this 1976 essay by the name of The 5 Smooth Stones of Liberal Religion is echoed in so many places in our denomination. And I'd given Joan the prompt to put these into the chat, so I don't have to, and I thank her for doing that. So you don't have to take notes. You can save the chat, and then it'll be there for you. And of course, I tell people, again, write me at summerservices@uuwayland.org. And if you have further questions, you can always come to the discussion of topic during our coffee hour after the service. So the trouble is, I'll admit, that essay is not an easy read. I've asked several First Parish friends to read it and tell me what they think, and I was not surprised when Jay Woodruff described it as rococo. And I'm sure he meant in the meaning over elaborate. It's not an easy read. So let me put it simply. And for I asked Stephanie and other people's indulgence if she feels I'm not quite getting it right. I think I'm in general right about this. So the 5 smooth stones. 1, it depends on the principle that revelation is continuous, ongoing. There is no one sacred text. 2, all relations between persons ideally ought to rest on mutual free consent and not coercion. Now that's a quote. And from which I therefore say, it is not confessional. 3, it involves the establishment of, quote, a just and loving community, end quote. There, I say there's plenty you can do on your own, but to get the whole package, you need a community such as ours here at First Parish. 4, he called social incarnation. I see this meaning that our ideas and our deals won't really matter unless they become manifest in the institutions of society, including its laws, which I see now is kind of what Rhonda McGee is doing when she talks about the inner work of racial justice. If we don't get racial justice, we're not really getting liberal religion happening in reality. And the 5th is that it is hopeful. Now, that's pretty much the hard part of what I'm talking about. 6 and 7 you may be already familiar with. 6 is our 6 sources of the living tradition. They're really just categories, but I think they're important because there is something valuable to be learned from each one of them, which can act as the very tool you'll need to get unstuck in your journey from where you're starting to that fab future. I know I have gotten great mileage. Let's face it, I mean, many of us, like me, we start with what's called, Jewish and Christian teachings. We grew up in certain denominations, that's what it was. Or we grew up humanist, okay? And I said, you know what? I'm going to take a look at Buddhism. Why? Because there it is. These sources, they were enacted, they were thought up because each of them has something very valuable. So it's like an exercise. Start with the faith that there might be something good there for you, not just, oh, we should know what these other people do. Anyway, that's the 6 sources and the 7 principles. Why, again, here I should say, I've been talking these up for a long time. In 2008, it was 2012, concerned about, what we should look for in our new minister. I wrote a sermon called Who Are You, You? And it was entirely based around these things. And in response, I've had friends say, well, so I can't be a good Unitarian Universalist if I don't have the 7 principles memorized. And I assure you, no. First of all, you can look them up. They're everywhere. But we can jokingly say it's basically be nice and recycle. It's don't be a butthead, have loving kindness. But it's good to keep them in mind. And the more you do, the more you remember them. Well, that takes us to 8, and just in time, because we're running out of time. 8 is basically 8 words to sum it up. If you can keep these in mind, it'll help you. We are inherently good. The goal is to be a better person. Yea, a better person who can make this a better world. And there are many sources to do that. To sum up, I call all these things together the UU yardstick. Your journey is uniquely yours, but you can use this robust method to get you from where you're starting to that vision of a better you and your part in making this a better world. I believe that 1, 2, 3, 4 can act as this UU yardstick to help you better gauge yourself and others as to whether any of us are living up to our ideals or instead abandoning or being blinded by them. And 5, 6, 7, 8 are pointers to the means by which we can find an answer, maybe more than one, to better respond to what Shakespeare called the slings and arrows of outrageous misfortune. Last week's service, led by the Reverend Dr. Stephanie May, started with hymn number 1012, When I Am Frightened. It asks questions like, when I'm hungry, will you still embrace me? When I'm thoughtless, will you understand? Will you believe me, stand by me willingly? Taken together, these things I've talked about become touchstones that can help us find our way in troubled times in our homes and families and communities. They provide concrete steps that can lead us always to answer such questions with the yes of a heart of loving kindness, with a mind free to find elegant solutions to challenges, with the agency to put them into action, and with the bliss that comes from being a person who can do all that without being ground down yourself in the process. It may sound corny, but I think that's fab. May it be so.